in New York. Shalom, Tal. How are you?
Shalom, shalom. I'm great. Now I'm unmuted. Great to be here. I wish it was in person, but maybe next time.
Next time, for sure. So let me tell you about Tal. Tal is an expert of foreign affairs and the Middle East, hosts the podcast Tal Talk Middle East, and previously co-anchored the daily primetime show Crossroads for I-24 News. She produced this for CNN International from Jerusalem during the 2014 Israel-Gaza war. Tal worked as a parliamentary assistant in the German Bundestag as a part of its flagship international fellowship program. She is fluent, listen to this, in English, Hebrew, Arabic, and German. Tal holds a BA in Arabic literature and history and a master's degree in contemporary Middle Eastern studies. We have a great timing for this program because Tal just returned from Israel a few days ago with many insights and interesting perspective on current events. During this program, you can submit questions in the Zoom chat. We will try to read and go over as many questions as we can during the time frame that we have. But before we dive in and talk politics and all important matters, we are all curious to ask you, Tal, what is it like in Israel now? And what does post-COVID world looks like?
Oh, it's a great question, Noam, and I'm so glad that I'm able to talk about it. I just returned from a 7-week-long stay in Israel, my home country, after not being there for almost 2 years. I moved to New York about 4 years ago, and I wanted to go earlier. I was in Israel for only 2 times, I think, within these 4 years, and of course, COVID changed my plans. It felt like paradise. I know that I'm biased, but it did feel like being in paradise right now. It's like a whole different world. It's a post-COVID world, as you put it out. I arrived there in a perfect timing, just when they started reopening the country. And if you walk around the streets of Tel Aviv right now in the evening, at night, you can barely find a spot at the hottest bars, the hottest restaurants, everything. It's as if they are celebrating life right now, whether they are aware of what they're doing or not. But Israel, Tel Aviv especially, does feel like a huge party right now. They vaccinated the majority of the population. They are leading the charts in vaccine doses administered per capita in the world. So it's 80% of the adult population in the country has been vaccinated. I think it's 90% of people over the age of 50, and that is really impressive. But if you remember, around the second wave of the pandemic, Israel was leading the charts internationally in a bad way, negatively. The second wave, they had it pretty well if you compare Israel to other countries, but then the second wave came and it was a disaster. So what happened? What really turned Israel into this international success when it comes to the vaccines? I think when I was there and I talked to people, and I'm always following what's happening there in terms of the news media as well, because I'm part of it. I'm still reporting to Israeli news channels and other outlets. One of the things that always comes up is Benjamin Netanyahu. Let's just put it this way. He has taken the vaccine operation, if you remember, it was also before another election period, which we will get to in just a moment, but he took it as a personal mission. And very early on, he picked up the phone and he made the calls to guarantee that people in Israel will get enough vaccine doses, and very, very early on, even if it means paying a higher price per dose when you compare it to the price that people paid in the US or in Europe. I mean, the government paid. But that is one thing. I think that even the CEO of Pfizer, his name is Albert Bourla, he said that it was like a personal mission of Benjamin Netanyahu. People who are not supporters of Bibi Netanyahu will tell you that they give a lot of credit to the efficiency of the health system in the country. And you got to give it to them, because it is very, very easy. And it was easy a month ago and 2 months ago to go get vaccinated in Israel. you just, they had many centers, they still have them, but they're not needed so much anymore. But many centers, you don't need to make phone calls, you don't need to refresh websites, you don't need to wait in very long lines. You just go there, you get your vaccine dose, and I got my vaccine dose there in Israel very, very quickly. So it's been very, very effective. I would also give some credit to the media and the public discourse, or the public pressure, depends how you're looking at it, in getting this rollout and the vaccine operation to become so effective with and resonating with people, because the vaccine issue has constantly been in the headlines in Israel. I don't think it's something that I saw here. News anchors, for example, anchoring newscasts with the stickers, I got my first dose of the vaccine, I got my second dose of the vaccine. So I think for better or worse, the public pressure, it was very much there, because they also have what you call here the vaccine passports. Over there, it's called the Tav Yarok, the green passport, which is quite a controversial policy. I think they're scaling it back right now, but for a certain period, only people who were vaccinated could dine indoors, for example, things of this kind. And not everyone was able to enjoy the reopening of the economy to the fullest, only if you got if you completed your vaccine doses. So some people, not everything is so rosy and great in Israel, because when you talk to people there about the pandemic, they will tell you that certain industries, the restaurants industry, the bars and so on, were very oh, okay. I can see that you're already submitting questions. I will try to address everything after we finish talking about all the topics. So I'll continue with the vaccines, and then we'll move on to politics and a bit foreign affairs ahead of the president's speech. So they still have in mind, the constantly changing guidelines, the loss of school days. So it's not like, Israel has been fantastic. It's just the vaccine period that everyone remembers. And, if you zoom out and look at the pandemic in Israel, the entire experience, it hasn't been so great as we now remember it. But now Israelis are celebrating. They're cautiously optimistic. They have very good reasons to celebrate life as they are doing, because they've been doing fantastic. And I've been thinking, it's such a national pride right now, being, first in the world in something. And I was thinking, if only Israel got to the World Cup or something of this kind, that would have been great reasons to celebrate as well. So just one more point that I want to make here. It's a test right now. This period is seen as a test, not only in Israel itself, because Israel is one of the most closely watched countries around the world. So what's happening there with the vaccines, the fact that Israel has been leading the charts with the doses administered, it could have an effect, an impact on other countries as well, as they are planning to reopen the economy to the fullest, and they are planning their rollout. So I want to start and talk about Israeli politics, but before I dive into the latest news, I just want to make sure that everyone is up to speed. As you know, Israel had just held its fourth election in 2 years. It was March 23rd, and luckily I was there. I skipped 2 elections, but I was there exactly 2 years ago, so I had the privilege of voting in April of 2019 and just on March 23rd now. And the results are, again, very confusing, very complicated, as always. I think everyone's gotten used to that. And right now, the politicians, lawmakers are playing hardball. That's the very complicated stage, as you know, of trying to form a coalition government. Right now, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he is the one with the mandate from President Rivlin. I think he has it for another 7 or 6 days. Noam, you're nodding your head, so I can see I'm about right. But so far, no success. Benny Gantz has rejected his offer to try to form another rotation deal between the two. That hasn't been very successful, the Israeli attempt at a unity government. That's why we gathered here again to talk about Israeli politics just a year later. And reportedly, Netanyahu's allies have been also pushing him to try to suggest a rotation deal to Naftali Bennett, his rival from the right. But the negotiations between them two also haven't yielded anything. There's a very bitter rivalry there. So it seems that what we're talking about now is eventually the beginning of the end of Netanyahu's rule of 15 years in the country. I think it's 13 years straight, if I'm not wrong. And it's becoming more and more likely that Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid will be the ones to form Israel's next government with some rotation deal between the two. I mean, we will have to wait and see, but this is the feeling right now. This is where things seem to be heading to. But keep in mind, and I know you're always keeping it in mind, because there's no guarantee that any government that will be formed right now will last for over a year, because the average tenure of the government in Israel since the establishment of the state of Israel, listen to this, has been 23 months. So it is remarkable. It is remarkable. How did we get here? Let me try to explain the stalemate. I know you're all familiar with the results, with the Likud party still being the biggest force in Israeli politics, coming in on top in every elections. But why is it so complicated? Every time Israel went to the polls over the last 2 years, something has changed. It's not as if we're voting again and again on the same issue. I mean, we are, but we're not. Let me try to explain. Every time new parties emerge, new partnerships between politicians, there are new trends and new developments, but the main issue still remains. It's always first and foremost a referendum on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And no bloc, and I'm speaking in terms of bloc, the pro-Bibi bloc, the Netanyahu is with his supporters and political allies. And on the other end, you have the Rak Lo Bibi. I don't know if our audience here speaks English, but it means anything but Bibi bloc. They also can't guarantee 61 seats, which is the majority needed to form a coalition in Israel out of a parliament of 120 members of Knesset. So we have the stalemate. That's where we are right now. And when you look at the results of the last elections, basically, they are saying a few things that are contradicting each other. And let me explain. It says that half of the country, more or less, does not want to see Benjamin Netanyahu as the prime minister. But the majority of the Israeli population is center to center right. So people are basically saying, we don't want to see Benjamin Netanyahu as our prime minister, but we do wish to see a right-wing government. Who do we want to lead this right-wing government? Well, they can't point to one person. That's the issue. That's why we have the stalemate right now. They don't want another election. Nobody wants another election. And nobody also wants another attempt, a failing attempt at a unity government, because we tried this already, right? And on top of everything, if that's not contradictory enough, then there is no real debate, there is no public discourse, or more so a political discourse, about changing the political system, the governing system, or even the election system in Israel. So there you have it. You know, that is why Israel is stuck politically, and it doesn't seem as if it's going to change anytime soon. You know, the democratic, the bug in the democratic system in Israel dictates that once a parliamentarian gets elected, the morning after they enter the Knesset, the thing they have to do first is to think about their re-election. So unlike in the American system, I guess, And this brings me to that because, you know, being in Israel for the election period after having experienced my first time in the U.S. Reporting about the U.S. presidential election, I've been having all these thoughts about similarities and parallels and differences between the two systems, between social trends here and social trends in Israel, and how things that are happening here are also influencing and resonating in Israeli politics. As you can imagine, what's happening here is always resonating in every corner of the world. So in a close ally like Israel, more so. So throughout the election campaign in Israel, I can tell you that Benjamin Netanyahu's strategy, the Likud strategy, really reminded me of Donald Trump, because he was out in the field every day interacting with people from all walks of life. On the other hand, you had Yair Lapid, who took more of a Biden strategy with a focus on social media, on Zoom events. He did not show his face around too much. He's not doing it now for sure. He's trying to remain low key, keeping silent until the Just Not Bibi, the anything but Bibi bloc gets the mandate from the president probably next, and will try, you know, to get a shot at forming their own government. But that's what he's been doing. And he hasn't been giving in-depth interviews, even, unlike other politicians in Israel, to the media, which was really interesting to see how the Trump-Biden rivalry throughout the election campaigns sort of, you know, it was sort of reflected in the way the campaigns, you know, chose to try it in Israel. I can't say that they copied it, but I think it's something that sits there. Gideon Saar, for example, I think he hired people from the Lincoln Project to try and assist. Well, I'll turn off my. I know you can hear it here. To try and boost his election campaign against Netanyahu. For example, last week, Netanyahu suggested that the next elections will be held in a different format with the public directly choosing the prime minister instead of only choosing the party. And then suddenly people on the left in Israel suggested that he's not accepting the election results, that he's trying to tear down the system, and that he is just like Donald Trump, who didn't accept the election results. So everyone is making these parallels. Yesterday, there was a political drama in Israel around the appointment of a justice minister. The Supreme Court intervened and basically turned down the person who was nominated by Benjamin Netanyahu. Today, Netanyahu scaled back. I don't want to get you inside the story, but eventually, Benny Gantz is Israel's justice minister right now, as he wanted to be. But the whole process was very ugly. And people on the left, for example, compared it to the ends of democracy. Democracy dies in darkness. And one of the prominent left-wing pundits in Israel even said that it was like the January 6th moment of Israel yesterday. So this is just one example. Something that I also keep thinking about is the talk of unity right now in Israel. Unity and healing, these are words that keep repeating in Israeli politics as well. The left, just like I would say here in the US to a large extent, says that once Benjamin Netanyahu will be removed from office, the process of healing and unity of the Israeli public can begin. But then you have people on the right in Israel who say what Republicans very often, I hear them say over here, that when the left talks about unity and healing, they talk about unity and healing with people who think exactly like them, and not unity and healing for all, meaning that once Netanyahu's supporters or Netanyahu's allies will be canceled, or their ideologies or their voices won't be heard so much, then you will have a so-called fake unity and healing. I think these are things that I've been thinking about. But here's the big difference that I do find between the Israeli society and the American society right now in terms of politics. In Israel, you have to understand, there is a very large public consensus around key issues. If you talk about, the status of Jerusalem, Palestinians, security, Iran, the ICC lawsuit, vaccinations, COVID, the public consensus is very, very large. And this is something that I don't find in the United States right now. Maybe it's not something that is reflected by the news media, unfortunately, because we've been taken to the extremes. And I think that in Israel, I wouldn't say that the media is perfect. It's far away from being perfect, but some reporters, some news anchors still try to have the appearance of neutrality, at least, which is something that maybe we have in local news here in the States, but we don't have it so much on the national level. In the US, if I go and ask, a progressive or a Republican or a Democrat or, just a liberal, why was the US founded? When was it founded? What's what are the main principles the nation was established upon? I will get different answers. Some will say, well, 1619, others will tell me 1776, but these are not, if you go on the streets in Israel and you ask people, what's the capital of Israel? Should we return to Golan Heights or to Syria? You won't be hearing so many different answers. The public consensus is very, very large. And most Israelis will just reply the similar questions to parallel questions that would have been quite controversial here, I guess. So just before we move on and talk, zoom out and talk more broadly about the Middle East, I want to make one point about, we talk so much about the Israeli elections, but there's also Palestinian elections, well, supposedly are supposed to go on in the coming months. For the first time in 15 years, the Palestinians are expected to hold their general elections in the coming months, May, June, and July. And the last time they held elections was in 2006. And you all probably remember what happened in 2006. That's when Hamas took over the Gaza Strip after Palestinian elections. But now, of course, they want to have elections because the goal is to somehow unite or reach some Palestinian consensus between the different factions in the West Bank and in Gaza. But of course, the Palestinian Authority, they are very apprehensive about the idea of having elections, although they wanted it and they need it because Abbas is not getting any younger with every day that goes by. But they are very apprehensive about it because they are scared that the idea of general elections will backfire against them and Hamas will take over the West Bank as well. So Abbas right now, the latest update, just to give you that, he wishes to postpone the elections, whereas Hamas, they wish to proceed as planned and hold the elections very, very soon. And I have a good friend who used to work at I-24 News with me. His name is Elon Levy. He's not there anymore, but he tweeted something very funny that I find very correct. He said, how does anyone think Israelis and Palestinians can have a single democratic country together? The Israelis cannot stop holding elections, and the Palestinians are incapable of holding even one. So that is very accurate. I wonder how will a system of this kind work? So in about 30 minutes from now, President Biden will deliver his address to Congress. And I am very curious, I assume, just like all of you, to see what will he have to say in the field of foreign policy. Will he mention Israel? I'm not expecting, because of course, domestic policy is much more of a focus of this administration. And I mean, very naturally with where we are right now with the pandemic and as a society right now. But I do want to discuss broadly what Biden has done in terms of foreign policy, the Biden administration in his first 100 days in office. What can we learn from it? Where we're heading? What has it been like in terms of, policy towards Israel or perceptions of the Middle East? And then we can break it down more specifically to topics, if you wish, when we do the Q&A very soon. So, maybe I need some water.
Please go ahead. We all fascinated on everything.
So, when Biden took office, one of the very prominent questions in Israel has been, it is going to be an Obama #2 administration. because and that was a concern for many across the Middle East, because as you remember, the Obama administration is something that worked quite well for the Iranians with the JCPOA and with the flow of cash, with the cash flow to the country. And it didn't work very well. It left a bitter taste, I would say, in countries like Israel, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and in Egypt with after the revolution that brought Sisi to power. And that has left a very large diplomatic leeway, I would say, for the Trump administration to go ahead and try new initiatives. And yeah, so I would say that on a scale from Obama to Trump, if we're trying to measure where does Biden fall on the Middle East, it's somewhat leaning towards the Obama administration, but not fully. It's President Trump has changed things that will be difficult to walk back. If we're judging by some of the appointments that President Biden has made in his first 100 days in office, when he just assumed office, then it does remind us of the Obama administration, because some of the figures that we saw there are very prominent now in terms of foreign policy, like Robert Malley, for example, who negotiated the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, on behalf of the US back in 2015. And that is a concern for Israel and for anti-Iran forces in the neighborhood. We are seeing a slow return to old paradigms, to old perceptions of the Middle East, like funding for UNRWA that is now back under the Trump presidency. It was a UN body that the administration sort of bashed and neglected. And it regarded UNRWA as part of the problem and not part of the solution, which personally I agree with. But now this perception has been rolled back, because funding for UNRWA is back. Funding for the PLO is now partially back. Suddenly, the old terminology is something that the State Department is using. The two-state solution. It's a term that the Trump administration refrained from using, because Jared Kushner, Jason Greenblatt, as you remember, they said that two-state solution is something that means one thing for the Israelis, another thing for the Palestinians, and a whole different thing to the UN or the European Union. Suddenly, the West Bank, occupied territories, these are words that we're hearing now, settlements, or even the refusal. I don't know if you saw that video of Ned Price, the spokesperson for the State Department, in which it was in a press conference, and some reporter asked him about the Abraham Accords and urged him to call the Abraham Accords by their name. The Abraham Accords, the peace agreements between Israel, the UAE, and Bahrain. And Ned Price he couldn't say the Abraham Accords. He said normalization agreements. We call them normalization agreements because the idea is to try to diminish the achievement of the Trump administration and the peace. It is peace. I would call them peace agreements before calling the agreements that we have with Jordan or Egypt peace, because this is actual peace. What we have with Egypt and Jordan, what Israel has with Egypt and Jordan are, let's say, no war agreements or some sort of, a truce agreement, but not a true peace. And that is what we are seeing with Bahrain, and especially with the United Arab Emirates. So the Houthis in Yemen, the Shiite force in Yemen that's fighting with the Saudis, threatening their territory every once in a while. Iranian-backed Houthis are no longer considered terrorists under the Biden administration. When they talk about militias in Iraq, the Iranian-backed militias or Iranian militias in Iraq or in Syria, sometimes they are using the term Shiite militias as if, it has nothing to do with Iran, because as we know, they are eager to go back to the JCPOA. And unfortunately, the appeasement of Iran is something that is sort of back. I think I will talk in just a moment more specifically about the Iran deal, but At the same time, this is not an Obama #2 administration, because President Biden is going to pull out the troops out of Afghanistan, which is, I see it as a very, very good development, and it should have happened before. We know that President Trump, by the way, wanted to do it. He wanted to do it before the elections, but then the story of Russian bounty program emerged, as allegedly stressing, if you remember the story, that Russian intelligence paid Taliban-linked people to assassinate US troops in Afghanistan. And what we now know through the intelligence community, that is not true, but it was a hurdle for President Trump on the way to fulfill his election promise and pull all of the troops out of Afghanistan. So that is one thing that President Biden is going to do, and I see it as a very good development. It's a sign that this administration is not going to be taking the very interventionist approach in the region, not in the Middle East, not when it comes to Israel and the Palestinian Authority, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So far, it doesn't seem so. We have to wait and see. Maybe in 1 year, 2 years, things will change. But right now, it doesn't seem as if, the focus is domestic policy, and that's where it should be right now, the way I see it. What else I wanted to tell you? So yeah, very carefully stressing it. Another point that I wanted to make is that this administration has put the human rights issue in the Middle East and the world very high on the agenda. We see it. It's been reflected just recently, last week, I think, when President Biden recognized the Armenian genocide. We see it in the way Biden speaks about Saudi Arabia and Mohammed bin Salman. He's been, the way he's been talking about the war in Yemen. He has pulled out, I think, 2 Patriots batteries from Saudi Arabia and stopped the deployment of a USS, an aircraft carrier also that was deployed to Saudi Arabia. So he rolled it back. Now it's not permanently there, which is another sign of, another signal to Iran. Let's talk about the JCPOA for a moment, because it's no secret that the Biden administration wants to go back to the nuclear deal. Iran knows it. Everyone knows it. We know it. Israel knows it. And it's going to happen. It's already happening. The talks in Vienna have picked up speed, and Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor, said that the U.S. wishes to go back to the deal on a compliance for compliance basis, meaning that the U.S. will remove some sanctions, take a step forward, and Iran will do the same and adhere to the JCPOA step by step. But the way I see it is that Iran, is sort of playing the U.S. right now. They have the leverage. That's how it seems, unfortunately. I would say that in a surprising way, not many people are very satisfied with the Biden administration policy towards Iran now. From an Israel point of view, it's very obvious why, because Israel is not satisfied with the old deal. So why not trying to negotiate a new deal? And it's not something that the Biden administration is really trying to do by some of the latest statements by Robert Malley. I think they just want to, revive the JCPOA as it is and maybe build on top of that in the future. But, the sunset clause is very close. Even if they revive the deal right now, I mean, it's just a couple of years valid, and then that's it. So Israel is not satisfied. Iran is not satisfied with the approach, because they think that, the U.S. has to compensate them for the Trump administration period. That's the point that Iran is making. And then you have Republicans saying that the president is basically giving up every kind of leverage that the Trump policy, the Trump sanctions have created for him going into negotiations with Iran, and that the administration is doing it at a time when Iran just negotiated a 25-year deal, long-term deal with China, a partnership deal with them, and then you have Democrats saying, progressive Democrats, I would say, stressing that why even flexing your muscles? You said you're going to go back to JCPOA. Why is it taking so long? Just do it. So there's a lot of criticism from all different players about what the Biden administration is now doing, but I guess we'll have to wait and see how it's all going to play out. We're getting close to the speech, and I want to leave some time to questions. But one of the things that jumped out to me in President Biden's inauguration speech when he spoke about foreign policy, and I think I'll finish with these points and we'll take it from there because I see that you wrote many questions there. I don't know if you remember, but he said something about the blurry lines, that there's no longer a very stark difference between foreign policy and domestic policy, and that it's all coming together. And I very much agree with it, and I very much see it. It's something that I recognize, for better or worse. Domestically, as you know, there's this constant debate right now about race relations, the trendy ideology that sees the society right now in the US as some sort of, through the lens of a clash between classes, a power struggle between oppressed and oppressors. And that has its way to translate into foreign policy. And that's what I am personally very worried about, because that could influence the way the US, the way Israel rather, is being viewed in the region by the United States. Because if under this, through this lens, you're either an oppressed or an oppressor. And if you are strong, then you must be the oppressor. So how can we support the oppressors? More so with military aid. These are questions that will come up, that are already coming up. If you see on social media, if you're reading the pulse of what's happening. And I was just on a morning show in Israel, and the anchor asked me, I think it was 2 days after, I guess it was the New York Post that published a story about a New York City mayoral candidate who was, some recording emerged of her referring to Israel as an apartheid state. And the anchor of the news show in Israel, the morning show, Avli Gilad, he asked me about it. And it was hard to make the point that, certain people, they don't even have warm words for their own country right now. So how can we expect them to understand what Israel does and what Israel stands for? So that is what I wanted to say about how domestic policy, domestic social trends are resonating in Israel. And listen, the Middle East is taking notice of all of that. Recently, there was an article in the Turkish press that I don't know if I agree with this article or not. I think I don't really agree about the role of the United States in world politics. And the point that this column was making is that the US is no longer such a deterrent force in the world, or such a vital player in world politics, and that we don't have to work ourselves around the idea of American superiority, and that we don't always have to listen to what the US has to say, and so on. What's interesting, I disagree with it, but the interesting point is the timing of such articles, and it's not the only one that I saw. The timing of such articles, in the early days of the Biden administration, and in our neighborhood in the Middle East, if only if you are strong, you will be taken seriously. And that goes exactly to the opposite of what's trendy, what's becoming trendy here in the United States. Because in the United States, if you're strong, then again, you're the oppressor. Or if you're strong, then it means that you're not necessarily recognizing that you have problems, that you have flaws. And that's why, what the US ambassador to the United Nations said in her speech lately, I don't know if you heard about it, but she talked about how the US is not perfect, how the US has its own flaws, which is correct. But doing it on the world stage is something that you have to keep in mind, because US friends and enemies are taking notice of this and making their own conclusions. So I see that we have 20 minutes now. And Noam, go ahead, unmute yourself.
You get an award for perfect timing. Thank you so much. Again, as an Israeli, I've I've learned so much and I took notes, but I want to give the stage for people here in the chat that want to ask questions. So I'm going to go into the chat and see chronologically that.
Keep in mind that we're recording this, so I see that some of you turned off your cameras. I will not, I will not mention your names, but somebody said, please address the rumor about non-Jewish Israelis having less access. I think that it was regarding COVID. Oh, regarding COVID vaccines, right. So from what I know, that is not true. I mean, it is very, very, very simple for everyone to get the vaccine. I think that in the Haredi and the Israeli Arab communities, maybe less people and percentage-wise took the vaccines, but I'm not even sure that it's the case anymore. Everyone has access. I mean, everyone in Israel has the same access. It doesn't matter if you're Arab Israeli, if you're Jewish Israeli, you're enrolled in a, I mean, it's not really, I'm using the American terminology. If you're enrolled in a health program, in a health insurance, Klalit, Maccabi, you can very easily go get your vaccine. What I would say that I didn't mention before, it is quite challenging to travel to Israel now, by the way, even if you are a Jewish Israeli with an Israeli passport. My boyfriend, for example, he doesn't have an Israeli passport, so he couldn't come along with me, which was very depressing because I couldn't go to his country. He's from Uruguay, and he couldn't come to my country. Everyone's having the same policies except for the United States, apparently. So it's quite, it has been quite challenging to travel there, a lot of paperwork. And they had daily quotas for the number of people who, even citizens who are able to enter the country daily. You don't have so many flights. I think they increased the quota lately. I think it's 3,000 people a day now, but when I went there, it was 1,000 people. And before I went there, just 2 months ago, they had like an exemptions committee that had to give you an authorization to go to Israel. And I got rejected 2 times as an Israeli citizen. So I had to postpone my flight to Tel Aviv 2 times. And then the exemptions committee was abolished and I could just go there. Okay.
Yeah, I know. I just wanted to add that I know that I'm from the Jewish Agency, so it's a familiar organization, but it is a situation to go back. I know Lorna's video is on. So Lorna, do you want to ask your question that you've written?
I didn't ask the question. Avi has all the questions.
You asked, the media didn't emphasize it because they did not want to give President Trump credit for, it's more
no. So let me address some of the questions. Is there any chance in desperation to resolve the stalemate, the political stalemate, that there will be a direct election for prime minister as Bibi would like? Actually, I would love to see it happening. I think it's just the fair way, you know. We had it in the past in Israel, if you remember, and then they just changed the system again because there was a different kind of stalemate back then, that people would choose a prime minister, but then the prime minister could not form a coalition government because they chose different parties that, you know, do not align with the prime minister's positions. You know, we don't have a constitution in Israel. There's no executive powers. So a prime minister is nothing like a president here in the United States. Even if you're the prime minister, your voice, your force is very much limited. Maybe we'll get to it eventually, but people have to agree upon that. Between Lapid and Bennett, who do you think can best pull a coalition together? Well, I would say Naftali Bennett. And it's very likely that if they have a rotation deal on the premiership between them, that Naftali Bennett will go ahead first. Although Yair Lapid has, his party, Yesh Atid, has won more seats in parliament, but Naftali Bennett, just like Victor Lieberman in the first elections, if you remember, he's in sort of a kingmaker position right now, because he's the one with the leverage. Because if he goes with Netanyahu, Netanyahu has more chances. If he goes with Yair Lapid, then they have more chances. So because he's the kingmaker, I think he will take the seat first in a rotation deal between them two. And he has, I just read, we didn't even talk about the Mansour Abbas and the phenomena of the Israeli Arab parties in the last elections, which was really interesting, because after 3 elections in which the, maybe 2, who's counting, in which the Israeli Arabs ran with the Joint List party, this time there was a split between the Joint List and a party by Mansour Abbas. He's a prominent Arab Israeli politician, and he decided to break with the Joint Arab List in order to be more flexible and to be able to support a right-wing government even. It hasn't happened so far, but Naftali Bennett and Mansour Abbas, they have met, I think, yesterday, so it could be interesting. He's probably brewing something right now. Let me see some more. Okay. Will an increased Arab diplomatic presence in Jerusalem have any impact on the management of the West Bank? It's a good question. I guess it's regarding the upcoming, or supposedly upcoming, Palestinian elections. I think we will have to wait and see how things, where the chips fall after they hold an elections, and if they hold an elections, and then we will see. Yeah, the management of the West Bank. I mean, everyone keeps asking questions about what will happen the day after Mahmoud Abbas is no longer the Palestinian president, but I think we will have to wait for this day if it ever arrives, and only then we will be able to answer question number 1 that I have here. Disturbing to the observer is the Kahanist behavior in Jerusalem and the depressment of Palestinian gathering after Ramadan. This, coupled with presenting obstacles to East Jerusalemites voting, seems alarming. Could you describe what you see on the ground? Oh, so I don't know if everyone's been seeing the latest occurrences in Jerusalem right now. It's bad. It's bad, people. It looks like Portland, this bad. Bad joke. What's happening right now is that you have Jewish extremists attacking East Jerusalemites and vice versa. And it's been ongoing for a while now, but it's quite reciprocal. I mean, the Israeli left is emphasizing the Haredi attacks, but the Israeli right is emphasizing what Arabs are doing to religious Jews over there. And I honestly forgot what triggered this latest wave of violence, but there was one prominent attack of an Arab Israeli, of I think a religious guy in Jerusalem, and then the judge released the person, or didn't get a very harsh verdict or something, and then that ignited everything. This very much resonates with what we're seeing in the U.S. in a sense, just this wave of violence right now. I don't know where things are heading, but I mean, we need to have a government before we can address these issues, very seriously and go to the root of these things. The issue being questioned is the degree to which Israel is helping Palestinians getting vaccinated. Yeah, I think we answered that. Oh, you mean Palestinians and not Israeli Arabs? So there's been a lot of misinformation throughout the entire pandemic about whether Israel is responsible or should be responsible for vaccinating Palestinians as well in Gaza, in the West Bank. So I know that Palestinians who are working in Israel have been getting the vaccines, that's for sure. And then there was an internal debate in Israel whether Israel should provide more vaccines for Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza. I know that some vaccine doses were given to the Palestinian Authority, I think, but it's not an issue. I mean, it's an issue that has been debated, but I think that only Palestinians who are working in Israel have been getting them, on a systemic base. That's what I am aware of. But I think that early on in the pandemic, there was also some sort of a refusal by the PLO to get assistance by Israel when it comes to the pandemic. So it's more complicated than it's been reported by international media and the focus that they had on the issue. According to the Oslo Accords, by the way, there's a clause there that stresses that health issues are to be handled by the PLO. So Israel is not responsible for health issues in the West Bank. But it's something that we can discuss, and I would love to hear what you think about it, whether it's the right approach or not. Do you see Hamas being strong enough to take the West Bank? Never say never. This could happen. This could happen. And when I'm thinking about it, I mean, it could serve Israel's right very well, because it will make the point that there's no partner on the other side. How will you talk to a terrorist group? How can you talk to a terrorist group about peace? At the same time, one of the points that Israel keeps making, as you know, is that Israel politically, diplomatically, is speaking in one voice. Of course, it's true that we don't have political stability and there's a lot of political turmoil in the country right now. But when Israel speaks in terms of about peace, about negotiations, Israel speaks in one voice, as opposed to the Palestinians, where you have Hamas in the Gaza Strip, you have PLO in the West Bank, you have also Islamic Jihad in the Gaza Strip, who sometimes act on their own and don't adhere to orders from Hamas. So if Hamas takes over the West Bank, theoretically, maybe eventually the Palestinians will speak in one voice. But I don't think it's the voice that the world and Israel wish to hear, because it may diminish every path towards peace. But we have to see. It seems to have started with dispersing the gathering after Ramadan at the gate. Yeah, it could be it. It could be it. But it depends. Again, I'm talking about the violence in Jerusalem again. It depends who you're asking, because some will refer to an incident in which a Haredi was attacked. Others will refer to the incident at the gate after Ramadan. The fact is that, I mean, this entire year has been very fertile ground for violence, not only here, also in Israel. Anything else someone would like to ask? Maybe some interaction here, because I'm feeling as if I'm speaking.
Yeah, if you feel comfortable to even show.
You don't need to ask. Maybe just a
have,
comment that you would like to make. Yeah.
Yeah, just to have you don't have to be on camera. Just if you want to unmute and ask Tal in person. We have a few minutes. So this is your chance. And I'm happy that we went through all the questions that you wrote on the chat. I wanted to ask you something a little bit off topic, just because I'm interested. What is the difference between, because I saw you on morning shows in Israel, what is the difference between broadcasting from Israel or broadcasting from New York, or do you see any differences?
So personally, for me, I will say, well, it depends. If I'm talking to, I also had the chance to talk to News Nation of WGN, for example. I think from Israel, they were very interested in how the vaccine rollout has been going on and the reopening of the country. And I actually took some videos on Dizengoff Street in Tel Aviv of bars open, and the anchor, I think it was Joe Donnellan. He was like, whoa, it looks amazing. What's it like being on the other side, the other side of the world, but also the other side of the pandemic. So I think personally for me, there's something very comfortable in speaking to American audiences, doing it in a foreign language as I do, as opposed to talking in Hebrew on, primetime, highly watched shows, because over there, everyone takes notice of what you do, what you say, what you wear. And these are people that I know personally. It's my family, it's my friends, it's, so you were on a morning show, then everyone throughout the day will say, oh, why did you say this? Why didn't you mention that? And here, I don't know the people, so I feel much, I'll say I'm more free to speak my mind, I think, in a foreign language to a foreign audience, just because. So I think that's why I'm here, because it's giving me some advantage here. One day I see myself going back to Israel and taking the experience that I gained here and translating it into Israeli media, because I think the American way of doing storytelling is still the best in the world.
Oh, what a wonderful way to sum up our program. You are doing shlichut without the title shlicha. You're really, it's amazing. So thank you so much, Tal, for joining us tonight. It was such a great program. I'm sure we learned a lot. I met Tal in Nashville in November 2019 at West End program, and I was just so fascinated, and I had to bring her again. So I hope that in 2022 you can come here in person and we can have another program here. So thank you so much.
It was so much fun. It was like back then, I think it was the winter of 2019, and I had so much fun. It was my first time in Nashville, and I fell in love with the place. I fell in love with the community, the people that I met face to face, and I cannot wait to go back. I cannot wait to go to the bars there again. I've been partying very hard in Israel, but I think Nashville is quite similar to Tel Aviv at this in that sense. So I am really looking forward to visiting there again. And by the way, if you wish to write to me, if you wish to have this conversation off record at some other capacity, you can write to me, and Noam has my details. She has my phone number, my everything. You can follow me on social media, and because I'm very curious to hear what you have to say. This is the way I see things, but I'm sort of an outsider in this country still, after having lived here for 4 years. It's 2 minutes to the president's speech, so I think it's a good time to wrap things up.
Great timing. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I will send you Tal's information. Thank you so much, Tal. Thank you for the Jewish Federation.
תודה, לילה טוב לכולם.
לילה טוב.
ביי ביי.
Thank you, everybody.